sunglasses. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Welcome to Hansik House, the podcast where we discuss the future of Korean culture. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michael Lee, and I'm joined by...
Hi, I'm your other co-host, Ru Kim.
In real, I'm quite excited today.
What's going on?
This is our very first episode. This is our first opportunity reaching out to everyone listening. All of you. Whether you're commuting on the Seoul subway, whether you're hanging out in LA or New York and K-Town with your Korean friends.
Or you're non-Korean but you're really engaged with Korean culture.
And at this moment, Korean society, whether you're a Korean citizen, born to Korean parents abroad, we're dealing with so many social issues right now. Now that Korea has become a developed nation on the world stage, we're trying to figure out our identity, our relation to Korea, especially for people like me who aren't born in the country, or you who study in the States from the country. Altogether, we thought we had to bring all of our voices to one place and create a platform where we can discuss new ideas, new perspectives, and come up with distinct solutions that help us become more connected to Korean culture, but also allow us to contribute to it and come up with new futures, a new idea and new ambition.
So Michael and I started a couple projects in Korea as architectural designers, and we started to build this much more intimate relationship with Korean people, Korean government, and Korean industries. And we realized how much of these pressing issues amongst young people are emerging, and it hasn't been really discussed on a greater level. So we Koreans do always talk about these social issues and our ideas about how the country has to be, but we only talk about these ideas internally amongst our friends, our family members, in our Kakao chat rooms. But we believe that in order to create new form of energy to bring these fresh ideas on the surface, we need to have a collective voice of having a conversation together, whether you're Korean, non-Koreans, and bring your knowledge there into practice.
And if you're wondering why we are dwelling on the word issue so much concerning Korea, every morning I listen to YTN News.
Equivalent to CNN in Korea.
Right, in my little effort every day to learn a bit of Korean. And on the news, there's usually a panel of people, typically older men, politicians,
Scholars,
couple
public
professors,
figures,
exactly,
yeah.
public figures, people who are supposedly in charge of the country, how it's run. They always at some point discuss some kind of problem, whether it's youth struggling through educational systems and finding a job, or housewives who suffer from depression, or salarymen who don't get to spend a lot of time with their families, or even the elderly population concerning their relevance to society past retirement. The one thing they don't talk about is where these problems are actually coming from and what we can do as individuals and a collective to tackle these issues and come up with new solutions. If there were solutions, if they were the experts they say they were, then we wouldn't be in this situation where Korea is growing into this international identity.
Usually, the news only delivers certain kind of information and it stops there. And it does not motivate or promote people to take actions further.
And a great part of this podcast and why we're doing this in both Korean and English, because we're not just speaking to the people in Korea or the Yuaksender who come here and study in the US. We're speaking to people like me as well, who are born abroad or travel a lot or have a great range of other experiences that the average Korean citizen does not have. And we want to bring all that knowledge together because the new solutions for Korea are not just going to be solutions that we bring from the US or from Europe or from other parts of the world. They're solutions that we come up with by looking at precedents of other places, adapting Korean history and culture to our current and future needs.
I'm from Korea. I'm an international student. I was born and raised in Korea and I came to the US for my college education. So for me, it has been almost 8 years now, and I have been seeing a lot of different types of Koreans. Koreans that are Korean citizens and Koreans that were born here, or Koreans that moved here when they were young, away from Korea, away from our families and friends. You might think to a certain degree it has to do with the job market in Korea. For instance, myself, I'm in an architectural design field, and job market there in Korea is not as vibrant as here. And of course, there's a financial reason too. But I believe the Korean society does not simply provide a supportive structure for an individual to pursue their career freely while exercising their own self-identity and creativity and simply your lifestyle overall in Korea.
And I myself, I'm not from Korea. I was born from parents who immigrated to the US in the 80s. I was born and completely raised in South Brunswick, New Jersey, in deep, deep suburbia. Went to public school from kindergarten to high school. At home, I spoke a bit of Korean, enough to communicate with my parents. But overall, I didn't have any connection to Korean culture. In the summer, sometimes I would visit to see extended family. But that was maybe a couple weeks every so often, every 2 years or so. Now, when I went to college, and I'm sure this experience is similar to many of you listening, I met international students for the first time. I learned the words 선배 and 후배 for the first time. On one hand, it was an amazing experience being among these people who looked just like me, but were from a completely different world. It was both amazing because I got to experience my culture more, the place I was supposedly from, but at the same time, it was also excruciating and embarrassing because I had to figure out my identity and figure out why I was Korean, what made me Korean among these people. Not to mention that speaking Korean was very difficult for me at the time. I realized through all these years that there are yet not enough robust social ways that Korea, the peninsula of Korea, the country, connects itself with Korean populations or anybody else abroad. Essentially, if you are an international student or if you're like me, an American-born Korean, once you step into the US, you are no longer associated with the country other than your skin color. And these are some of the reasons that typically when international students and foreign-born Koreans get together, they have a very difficult time associating
Do they even
themselves.
get together?
No, they don't at all.
Yeah.
Really. I mean,
Most of the time.
let's take something we're very familiar with. In a college or university where there are a lot of international Koreans, there are a lot of American-born Koreans, it's so easy to pick out who's Korean-born.
And also they usually have Korean Student Association
Exactly.
and Korean International Student Association.
Which is basically a club where Koreans get together and drink all the
Yeah,
time.
but in two different types. Well, this kind of tension exists between all scales amongst, for instance, when I go back home, I'm more of an Americanized Korean amongst my Korean friends, Korean-born
Because
friends.
You've been here for 10 years. You
Almost,
know,
yeah.
You spend a third of your life here.
Right. So I think we're missing this general public sense of what's Korean identity.
And the same thing happens to me. When I'm with, let's boil this down to very simple terms. When I'm with my white friends or Latino friends or black friends, I'm Korean. I'm the Korean guy. I'm usually the only Asian that's in that group. But when I go to Korea, I'm the American.
Right.
I'm a Yankee. I'm an Ise. I'm a Twinkie. I'm a whole slew of other words. And these tiny little nuances come about because Korea is still a very monochromatic nation. We're one person, one blood.
One Korean.
One Korean. 대한민국, right?
Yeah.
And we feel still an almost moral obligation that when you say the word Korean, you're Korean, it means something. You have to speak Korean, you have to know the culture and history.
Right.
There's this very strong biological connection to the country.
So when I meet Korean Americans, I immediately expect them to know Korean moral,
And that's ridiculous.
Korean norms. Yeah.
Right, that's ridiculous. We're from completely different countries, completely different contexts. And yes, I eat kalbi every so often on the weekends. There are actually culturally and socially very few things that link us. And this tension and this experience of when you're walking down the street and people see you, and because you look Korean, they expect you to speak Korean, know some history, know some current events. When I went as a kid, I knew nothing about Korean culture, history, and my language
Because
skills
you
were
were
very poor.
educated in America. You
Exactly.
went through American school system.
And as soon as I start speaking, even if I try my best in Korean, they know
Yeah.
right away that you're not from here. And this strenuous relationship, overall, from my perspective, it seems to alienate a lot of Koreans. Not only Koreans who are born in the US, but also Koreans who immigrate here. Because of all of our diverse experiences and what feels like we have to fit into this cookie cutter form, if we don't match those expectations, we get very turned off by it.
Right. So your background as immigrants doesn't really translate into Korean culture at all. So people that are in Korea don't know what Isa's life is about or how they're
Yeah, and
How
if you
they're
don't speak
raised.
Korean or know the culture, then
Yeah.
people assume that your parents didn't raise you well.
'Cause
And
they just don't know.
that's
They don't know.
ridiculous. Yeah. And again, we want to bring those experiences together. We want to create that common strand of identity and what it means. What parts of our culture can make us proud, productive, make us want to associate with the country or the people more. That's what we're after. That's what
Or
we're
do
looking
you
for.
even have pride to exercise?
And just like the relationship between international students and American-born Koreans, we wanted to share the problems and the obstacles that all parts of our community and society face. We want to share those obstacles across boundaries of age, boundaries of social status, boundaries of, well, national boundaries. We want to create more empathy and more understanding because of this sharp cultural development that has happened in and around Korea in the past 30, 40 years. So this podcast is aiming to be just a short period of your weekly schedule where you listen for 20 minutes, we listen to the topic that we bring to you every week, and you reflect. You reflect on Korean culture, your relationship with the culture, and share your experiences, depending on those topics, with us. No matter what your age or what your background, tell us what you went through or your opinions on these stories. In that way, we can create a more holistic picture of what Korea can face together.
Because we're architects, we are thinking of a big picture of our society. We need your engagement. We need diverse experiences and expertise from everyone who can contribute. We also want to mention that this podcast is not just us two to talk about our own opinions, but we want to share ideas that are currently being discussed out there on all different types of social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and news articles.
And a lot of people we see on these media sites, people who are currently analyzing Korean culture, tend to be foreign people, right? People from Europe or America, people who don't have any real connection to Korea. They come, they tour, they see parts of the culture and the country, and they give their, and to be honest, very shallow perspective on what Korean culture is like. And it's time that all of us who have a certain connection to Korea look inwards, see the status of the country and the culture with our own eyes, and help translate to the world. Not translate just through the language, but translating it culturally, helping people understand what it means. Whether that's something as deep as educational policies or something as simple as why do people get plastic surgery so much in Korea? These tend to have very simple answers for many people. But the reality is it's a very complex and societally knotted situation.
And vice versa for Koreans too. Many Koreans want to engage foreign perspectives, but they are having a hard time understanding how the outside world works and how that's relevant to Korea.
One thing preventing a lot of this development is that, like we said before, Koreans, especially young Koreans, have a hard time expressing themselves or getting their knowledge out there. And in many countries, we depend on the young generation. And to be honest, the new generation of Koreans now, the young people, people in their 20s and 30s, they have an immense amount of knowledge and information and experience about the outside world that Korea just does not have yet.
So you mean the older generations of Koreans?
Yes, and currently, just like many conservative countries, the political and economic systems of Korea are run by people in their 50s, 60s, 70s.
Right.
And young people just do not have a place to voice their experiences.
Or exercise what they've been taught or knowledge.
Right. So even if there are new ideas, better ideas, new solutions, there just isn't a platform to put those systems into place. And the reason why we are so intent on getting this conversation started is because if you look at the numbers, this is a dire situation for people of all ages. Last year, a survey came out on Saramin, the monster.com equivalent of finding jobs in Korea. And they did a survey of thousands of people. And what came out was honestly astonishing. Among young people between the age of 18 and the early 30s, 80% of the people polled wanted to move out of Korea. They wanted to leave for any other country, reporting that currently the social and economic system of Korea, how you grow up and become a member of that society, they're calling it Hel Joseon, as in the Joseon dynasty that lasted for 5 centuries until the late 1800s when Japan occupied Korea and completely converted it. They're calling it Hel Joseon, this hierarchical dynastic system with kings and queens and beggars and peasants. And they're saying that depending on whether you're born with what we say in America, a silver spoon in your mouth, or what they're calling a dirt spoon in your mouth, depending on if you're born into a rich family will determine what kind of schools you go to, your lifestyle, your marriage opportunities, your career. Everything about your day-to-day life will be determined by that. And this anxiety of a hierarchical lifestyle, the same system that our parents went through in Korea, and the same reason why a lot of Koreans left Korea to begin with.
It's endless cycle, pretty much.
And that's also the reason why so many Yuaksing are coming to the US.
And then they don't leave. And also their parents sometimes don't want them to be back, ironically.
And that is a very disturbing state of affairs. So this week, with those statistics and some of these topics, we wanted to touch upon the idea of hope in Korea. What individuals' hopes are, what everyone's sense of hope concerning the culture is. Is the culture a source of pride for you? Does it provide security? Does it provide energy and opportunity that culture does in many other contexts of the world?
Although I want to mention that 2,000 people from that Saramin survey is a very small sample to draw a conclusion from, because we have 50 million people live in our peninsula. But it is a sample size for a greater discussion that people are having currently in Korea. And it brings a discussion of social health of our country.
Because we seem so advanced. We are, I believe, currently the 13th strongest economy in the world, which is an incredible state of affairs since 20, 30 years ago, when we were basically a third world nation, industrial nation.
Yeah,
coming
back
about.
then, people didn't wear t-shirts on the street.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, there were a lot of naked homeless people on the street in the summer.
You've seen them?
I've seen them, yeah.
Wow.
The world right now is admiring our food culture. It's really hip and trendy.
Our pop culture.
Exactly. Dramas, our movies.
K-pop.
And from the outside, it seems like we're this super sparkly nation where anything is possible. And it seems that our country has completely liberalized when we see people with crazy dyed hair and absurd costumes in our music videos and TV channels. But the reality is very different.
When you actually look inside what each individuals are going through, you will be able to sense this pessimistic, defeated energy. You see how often Korean younger generations are saying, "Oh, 짜증나, 귀찮아, 우울해," which is what, irritated.
하기 싫어.
Yeah, I'm not feeling doing it, or
때리고 싶다.
I'm annoyed.
그만두고 싶다.
Yeah. So if you are depressed or sad and irritated, if you say that so often in the United States, people recommend you to go see a doctor, right?
And that comes to the fact, and this is very true of Korean society, we keep our problems hidden. We see them as embarrassing. We see them as weaknesses to ourselves, our family. And this idea of swallowing your pain, right? 참아.
Yeah.
참아한다고.
Yeah, 그냥 참고 넘어가라고.
And that your weaknesses or your obstacles are these insecurities. We want to reverse that. We think that is the point of discussion where we can change that mindset and from there admit our problems, because we definitely have so many. We talk about them all the time privately. Reverse that and then build upon these new convictions.
So for Koreans that were born in Korea, we as individuals, when we were growing up, we were told what to do. There's no room for us to pursue our own identity or creativity at all while we're growing up. We have to go through this intense school system from elementary school till high school that is being dictated by your score system. So there's no personal journey or story or space to bring out your character. We are not expected to make our own life decisions based on what we want to do in the future, but we have to choose as we receive our scores.
And it seems absurd at this point in our contemporary society that for Korean citizens, almost their entire future is determined by that one test score. Basically in the US, if someone were to tell you, okay, you take the SAT standardized test one day out of the year, you have one chance, and depending on that score, someone else chooses essentially where you go to school, what you study,
Yeah.
and eventually what you'll do as a living.
Right.
And if you're dissatisfied with that score, you have to study for that test an entire new year. An entire year just for that test.
I have a couple friends that spent 1 to 3 years just to study for that test again.
And though that culture and that system seems ridiculous to a lot of us, a lot of that translates to how Koreans grow up abroad, even away from the country. It's very typical to hear when you're growing up that becoming a doctor or lawyer is the ideal form of education for a lot of people, no matter who you are, no matter if you love music or cooking or anything else. And one of the Hyungs that I'm living with taught me a great phrase the other day, 엄마 치맛바람, which translates roughly to your mom's, what is it? The
Air in the skirt.
Right, the
wind underneath the skirt.
wind underneath your mom's skirt.
Yeah.
And basically what we say in the US, tiger moms when it comes to Asian families. Moms that push them, parents that push them in a very strong direction. And kids just don't have any time to stop and think about what they want to be in their life. That hope, that space for hope is gone.
So in the US, it might be your tiger mom, but in Korea, it's the entire society that's pushing you towards one direction for your score.
And now that Korea has become so diverse, and Koreans all around the world are becoming movie stars and pop stars, they're becoming chefs,
Right.
owning institutions of all different kinds. We're diversifying much farther away from
The traditional way of living or studying.
exactly.
And also, there are so many Koreans that are non-Koreans that actually immigrated to Korea from Southern Asian countries for jobs, marriage, and a lot of different kinds of reasons.
The Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, all over the world. And this creates a situation, a societal atmosphere where there's very little conviction. You're being pushed in a certain direction. You're being pushed what to study. You're being pushed into an office. You're being pushed to raise your family in a certain way. And it's not just for young people. That translates, again, to people who are raising families, to older people. In the same survey for Saramin, people in their 50s, 70% of them wanted to leave Korea. 60 and above, 60%. So right now, the majority of Koreans do not want to live in the country in which they are born and raised. These things, they really get us fired up because there must be ways that we can diversify this image, this atmosphere, this society, and allow the seed of hope to grow within each individual associated with the country and the culture.
So tell us your stories. What kind of experience you went through, or what kind of Korean society are you actually living with beyond this Korean Americans or Korean Koreans, or your relationship to Korean culture, whether it was in America, Korea, somewhere else in the world. We are ready to hear about your stories and ambition for the culture.
And again, this podcast, after you listen to this, and thank you. Thank you for listening to the first episode. Spend a couple minutes thinking about this. Just sit down. You can talk to your friends about it later, your parents, your family members. Just a moment. Think about this. Because this has implications on not just us, but everybody. Every new person that's born who wants to call themselves Korean in some way. If this is going to get any better, if there's going to be more hope, we need to offer our side of things, our rich experiences, so that their future is as bright as the one we're going to make for us. So we've set up a Twitter handle, a Facebook page. You can contact us in our email, hansikhouse@gmail.com. Our Twitter handle is @HansikHouse. And this is where we want to have these conversations. After you have that small moment, send us what you think. Be as vocal as you want to be. Send it to us in private or anonymously. The more we diversify, the more we enrich our own identity, the more opportunity and hope we're going to have. And down the road, each week, we'll bring you guys new articles, new ideas, new pressing issues, because we want to get everybody's input in this.
Following this episode, we are going to release another one in Korean. So we are tackling similar topics for each episode.
But tailoring it for a very Korean audience. So if you listen on that as well, if you can understand and speak some Korean, you'll get an idea of how we're also trying to engage the other side of the bridge, which are people who are very enmeshed in that culture.
From myself, Ru Kim, and Michael Lee, thank you for joining us. This is Hansik House.
Looking for a Korean future together.